Okay, so this is my final video for the book, The Second Founding. This one's in chapter 4, named Justice and Jurisprudence. So again, first I'm going to go over the notes and then how it connects to the main conflict and the historical narrative. Okay, so first I wrote about the people. We have Justice Samuel J. Miller, who authored the Slaughterhouse Cases, majority narrow the 14th Amendment, privileges or immunities to national rights only, curbing federal protection. We have Justice Joseph P. Broadley, and Cruikshank limited federal reach against private violence, later wrote to the Civil Rights Case majority strike down the 1875 Act. Then we have Justice John Marshall Harden, and then we have again Charles Sumner and Brotherhood of Liberty. They were like a black legal intellectual group criticizing the court's retreat and organizing ways to ask for their rights. We also have the Southern Democratic Parliamentaries. Okay, moving on to places and events. We have the Slaughterhouse Case of 1873, which upheld the Louisiana's slaughterhouse monopoly, drastically narrowed privilege of immunities, shifting future legislations to due process. We have the United States versus Cruikshank of 1876. We also have the federal election prosecution of 1870, where courts upheld federal convictions of officials who discarded black ballots in federal elections, affirming national supremacy there. We also have the Federal Electoral Bill of 1890 and the U.S. expansion and new territories. Okay, and then the chapter talks about ideas and technologies to search during this time. For example, state action to crime, which said that the 14th Amendment restrains states, not private actions, hamstring federal remedies against private discrimination. There's also the privileges or immunities versus due process. For example, the slaughterhouse sidelines P or I, later rights expansion must route through due process. Then there's the civil versus political versus social rights, and then the liberal of conflict and the federalism priority. Okay, then we have conflicts. So we have the national enforcement versus states' rights, which is Congress sought to protect black rights, court narrowed federal power, pushing remedies back to hostile states, amendments versus enforcement, since the amendment's language meant like narrow judicial readings and blunting Reconstruction's aims. There's also the police power versus individual rights, the private terror versus federal protection, the equality principle versus social segregation, and the democracy versus disfranchisement. Okay, moving on to the purpose or historical narrative. So the main conflict of this chapter, which is chapter 4, basically shows how judicial interpretation anchored in federalism and the state action decrying system adequately hollowed out the Reconstruction Amendment's egalitarian promise. And the Constitution text promised freedom, citizenship, and equal protection. The court in late 19th century jurisprudence limited those guaranteed freedoms when discrimination came via private actions or state neutral laws. Okay, and how does this all connect to the historical narrative? So basically, Foner frames this chapter as the turn from constitution transformation to constitutional retrievement. Key decisions like the Slaughterhouse Cruikshank civil rights cases redirected litigation and away from the most powerful textual path and signal to southern regimes that federal protection was resenting, paving the way to Jim Crow. Harlan's dissents preserved the Reconstruction vision for the future, but in the Gilded Age, the court's narrow readings, Congress' fading will, and overall organized white supremacists, like violence converted rights on papering rights, which denied practice. And this basically clarifies why the second founding required a second civil rights revolution in the 20th century to revive the amendment's original aims of equality. And yeah,